I'm on my way home for lunch and to meet my Uncle Farron. He is coming up to actually tune my wife's piano for her. But a while back when we were down to his place, he told me he was going to give me my my grandpa's buck that is mounted in his basement currently, and that he was going to hand it down to me because I was the one that wanted it out of the grandkids. And so I don't know if he's bringing it up with him today. This will be the first time that that he's come to our house, so I don't know if he's bringing up that buck or not, but if he is, I am going to be really excited. So we're going to go home and meet up with Uncle Farron and let him tune the piano, and hopefully he has me a big surprise. So I came home for lunch, and guess what? Look at this. Uncle Farron brought me Grandpa's buck. Oh, this is cool. Look at that thing. Look at that thing. What year was it shot, Uncle Farron?
32.
1932. And it was in, if I remember right, it was in October, and it still had the velvet on, right?
Right.
So it was a, they call a stag. And that is one awesome looking buck. I'm so excited to get this deer. It's got all kinds of points all over it. It's got a couple of kickers. It's got a dropper. It's got so many little cactus points down on the bases that it's incredible. It's got some good mass to it. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I'm so excited to get this buck. Awesome.
But Dad, those two top ones are like skinny.
Isn't that a cool buck, J-Swing?
Yeah. His ears are hard.
We'll mount it right up there. It'll be cool, won't it? Won't that be a cool mount right up in there?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm excited.
Me too.
Okay. Alright, well, here is Grandpa's buck. And you can see it's pretty impressive buck. Put a tape on him, and he tapes out at 33 inches. He's got, this side has 7 inches of mass at the bases. This one has 6.5 inches of mass at the base. So the story with this buck, he was shot in, actually it was 1934 during the middle of the Great Depression. And my grandpa was, of course, a poor farmer, a small farmer. He had some animals, and he was trying to make it through for his family with the little farm and the animals. And you know, things just weren't quite working. Anyways, he and Grandma, being very faithful and religious people, they prayed and prayed and prayed, and they felt that they would receive answers to their prayers and help. And Grandpa was working on a road crew for $1 a day back in 1934. $1 a day. And so one day he was out in his field, and he felt impressed to go home for lunch. So he went home for lunch. He grabbed his old Colt 40-65 rifle and walked about 3 blocks into the hills there from his house. And as he crossed a wash and went up on the bank on the other side of the wash, this buck was standing there about 30 yards away from him. And Grandpa was a really good shot. And so he pulled his gun up and he fired off his shot, and the buck didn't even flinch. Didn't even flinch. And he thought, I know I hit that buck. So he chambered another round and took a second shot, aimed right at the same place in the neck, because at that time they didn't want to ruin any meat, so he was shooting him in the neck to try to save as much meat as possible. Aimed at the same spot and shot again, and again the buck didn't even flinch. And Grandpa chambers a third round, and as he chambered a third round, the buck started to drop his nose. His old Roman nose started to sag a little bit, and Grandpa knew that it had hit him. And so the buck never fell over. He just lowered his nose until his nose was all the way to the ground, and then he lowered himself down to his two front knees, and then just set himself down on the ground and died. And so Grandpa went back to the house and ended up getting his horse and brought his horse out to help bring the deer home. They actually weighed this buck, and the thing that impressed Grandpa the most about this was the size of the body on this buck. He said it was enormous. They weighed the buck. Field dressed with the head, the buck weighed in at over 380 pounds. It was a massive, massive deer, and Grandpa was just ecstatic about all of the meat that he was going to be able to take home to his family. And so he brings it home, and of course there's all kinds of rumors going around in town about this great big buck that was shot, and so everybody wanted to see this buck. And there was a bunch of hunters, out-of-state hunters from California, and these gentlemen had money in the Great Depression. They were well off and they had money, and so one of the hunters offered Grandpa up $50. He paid him $50 for the head. He said, "That's all I want. You can have all the meat you want. You can have the meat. I just want the head." And so without hesitation, Grandpa said, "Done." And he takes the $50, and this buck ended up going to California for many years. The gentleman that bought him from Grandpa actually won a few big buck contests down there in California with him. And years later, the gentleman ended up dying, and his widow had family and friends there in Enterprise where Grandpa lived. And the widow ended up calling and finding out that Grandpa still lived there in Enterprise. And she called Grandpa, and this was in the 1950s. She called Grandpa and said, "Do you want your head back?" And Grandpa said, "Of course I do." So in the 1950s, this buck returned back to Grandpa. And it was there in Grandpa's home, in his basement, scaring all of us little grandkids, until my grandpa passed away, and then my uncle took him. And my uncle has had him until last week. And my uncle brought him up to me and said that I get to have him now. So that is the story of Buck. That's the name of this buck. It just happened. My uncle brought me my grandpa's buck. Check it out. I'm so excited. Yeah.